I've been asked by the European Union, the Commission in Brussels, to come to Georgia, where I've been before in previous capacities, to assist in the process of moving from one government to the next. And my task is to try to assist in the protection of human rights. My intention is to do my best in order to ensure that human rights will be respected in future in this country. I've seen quite a negative development during the last decade in several areas, that we have got an undermining of the agreements that we had reached on human rights. I think the economic crisis contributed to that, and the emergence of extremist movements in many countries, also in Europe, not least in Europe, where they began to propagate for intolerance. They scapegoated certain minorities in the societies, like migrants, like Roma. And there's also been an anti-Semitic tendency in several European countries, intolerance in relation to, and lack of respect in relation to what we call lesbian and gay and transsexual people. There's a homophobic tendency in many countries in Europe today. Minority peoples have been squeezed and marginalized, discriminated rather much, and the trend is not positive there. I've been in Georgia many times, mainly as Commissioner for Human Rights in the Council of Europe. And that was also during a period when there was this war in 2008. So one problem which came very clearly to me, and which is still there to some extent, is the situation of those we call internally displaced people, IDPs. Who in many cases would like to go back to their original homes but cannot for political reasons. And of course their situation is a matter for human rights. It's important that they are offered possibilities, different options, in order to continue their lives in the most human rights friendly way as possible. Here in Georgia, I have noticed that there are minorities, and they will have ethnic minorities who also carry a special culture, a special language in some cases. You have religious minorities, you have Muslims, for instance, in this country, and you have also the situation of some people who were during the Stalinist period expelled and forced to leave to another area. I'm thinking about the Meskhetian Turks, Muslims and other religious groups who do not belong to the majority religion in the country, the Orthodox Church. They have the right to also exist in the country and to have their desires taken seriously. I think one of the tests for the maturity of the democracy in Georgia and whether human rights really are respected is whether those minorities will have the possibilities to be heard in society. If they have complaints, that these complaints should be listened to carefully, and when their rights are violated or not respected, that something should be done in order to give them these rights and protect these rights. That's a real challenge for Georgia. When it comes to minorities, a good experiment in many countries have been that they have set up their special bodies which would be composed of representatives of minorities who could together address the responsible government with their requests, so that they would have a clear, agreed voice in the society. The point is for them to be heard and to be able to take part in the discussion in the society. In my previous capacity, I was Commissioner for Human Rights in the Council of Europe. I was in Georgia several times and also reported, and I found that there were some problems in the way that the system of justice itself worked. Of course, the system of justice is absolutely crucial for respect for human rights. If the law enforcement, the prosecution and the judiciary and the penitentiary, the prisons, if these institutions don't work, then there are problems when it comes to human rights. There were some systemic problems I noticed in Georgia when it comes to that. So now with a new situation, new political situation, it is very important that those systemic problems which were there will be addressed and problems remedied. So that's part of my mission now, to argue for that. There has been some progress in the overcrowding in the prisons, in the penitentiary institutions, has gone down. And there are fewer people in prison now than before, which is positive. I hope that will also mean that the treatment of those who are in prison will be more positive, more liberal than before. What we tell now the authorities is that the procedures, the agreed international procedures, should be respected in all cases. There should be no political element in the sense that you want to punish someone from another political party, etc. That's not allowed. System should be impartial. The parliament in every country represent the people. They are elected. So they have an absolutely crucial role when it comes to everything, including to adopt legislation, laws, which would regulate the human rights situation. But it's important to remember that the parliaments are not only there to agree on laws, legislation, but they have also an overseeing role when it comes to the executive and should be monitoring how the executive, the government, is behaving in all fields. Poverty does, of course, affect human rights, both in the sense of if you are poor, you tend not to have the social rights that you have according to the international standards. But poverty also, we know, really means a lack of access to the courts or other institutions. Corruption tends also to affect the human rights situation, and when you have corruption in the justice system, that's particularly bad, because it means that people with money and contacts, they can get their will through in the system, while people without money or contacts, they are disadvantaged because of this corrupt situation. So corruption is a real threat against human rights. The first is knowledge. Human rights is really rooted in attitudes, and it's very important that people know about their rights and the rights of others as well. And one attempt that is being made by international organizations is to promote what we call human rights education. There should be a clear element of human rights teaching, education in the school system itself, so that young people, pupils, will get contact with what is the essence of human rights, values in their respect for others. There is a need for not only the school people, the pupils, but also for the public at large to know about their rights. The media do have an important role to play. Unfortunately, they do not always play that role, but I think we should continue to ask them to do it. Those professions which relate to human rights problems and who are in the forefront when it comes to human rights situations, thinking about the police and the judges and the prosecutors, of course, but also social workers, health personnel in general, teachers themselves who meet so many people, young people in their lives. They should have a strong element of human rights in their professional education. The political will is very, very important. That the politicians and the political institutions should be committed to protect human rights. And they should demonstrate that in action, not only talk about it when it's convenient. We are not talking about rhetorics only. We're talking about commitment in the sense of taking actions. Actions which sometimes will cost a bit of money, but is worth it. Actions which may sometimes be inopportune, because it may not be to the pleasure of some people, that you protect, for instance, minorities very strongly. But those who decide, they have a leadership role, and they should play that when it comes to human rights. The international community is very important in all those cases, because we have, we have agreed standards on human rights matters, which are discussed. Texts have been scrutinized, and compromises have been made, and finally there are agreements. And the whole system builds on the notion that these agreements should be respected. And this goes for European standards and international United Nations standards. Then the European bodies, European Union not least, but also the Council of Europe, they have the capacity to also assist, not only to decide whether violations were committed or not, but also to help to prevent violations in the future. But by and large, I would say that cooperation in Georgia is facilitated by this interest here in Georgia when it comes to the outside world and its opinions about what's happening here, etc. So the potential for very constructive relationship between the European Union and other international structures and the local decision makers is definitely there. There is a real potential there. The civil society organizations are also very important in the sense that they represent people locally, and they could be politically impartial. They may not, in many cases, be linked up to one of the political parties if there's a polarized political situation in the country. So they are favorites when it comes to with whom international organizations would like to cooperate with, and that's something positive. In fact, one of the very basic ambitions from the international organizations is to secure that there is a space for the civil society groups, that they have the freedom, that the authorities are not trying to cut them down if they are inopportune or critical. The heart of human rights is very much a question of struggling against discrimination, that no one should be discriminated. And it is not by random that almost all human rights treaties has a formulation, everyone has a right to. So there should be a possibility for everyone to enjoy their human rights. A serious human rights education so that everyone knows their rights in the society, and those who take the final high-level decisions, that they are committed in action to respond to the requests from the population. That's human rights.